Welcome to this wonderful occasion. This is the kickoff of a great day of celebration and of the Keller Center. And Dennis and Connie are here and their family. And we're going to start out with a keynote by one of our most distinguished alumni to talk about the relationship between engineering education and society. And it's my great pleasure to introduce President Shirley Tillman, who will introduce our speaker. So thank you again for being here.
Good morning, everyone, and I offer my thanks along with Vince's in having all of you coming here today to help us celebrate the opening of the Keller Center. I am also thrilled to be able to introduce one of my heroes in life, Norm Augustine. In an hour, we will be formally opening the center that is dedicated to the importance of incorporating engineering into the education of all Princeton students. To succeed, engineering must be presented in a way that is socially relevant and intellectually accessible, as well as intellectually engaging. But first, we are going to hear from a man whose own career has been profoundly influenced by engineering, but whose contributions to society have not been bound by it. A man who has helped to build a vital American industry, but who is equally concerned with the vitality of our nation as a whole. Norm Augustine, whom I'm honored to introduce today, is a Princeton alumnus who earned his undergraduate and master's degrees in what was then known as the Department of Aeronautical Engineering. On leaving Princeton in 1959, he embarked on a distinguished career that has spanned the worlds of industry, government, and academia. Norm served as chief engineer at the Douglas Aircraft Company, Undersecretary of the United States Army, and chairman and chief executive officer of the Martin Marietta Corporation before taking the helm of the newly formed Lockheed Martin Corporation in 1995, all the while earning a reputation for outstanding leadership, progressive thinking, and the highest ethical standards. He has brought those same qualities to the voluntary sector, serving as chair of the American Red Cross, president of the Boy Scouts of America, chair of the National Academy of Engineering, and president of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronomics. I can't even pronounce that word. Among many, many other roles. In his spare time, and I say spare time in quotation marks, he has authored 2 books, Augustine's Laws and Augustine's Travels, and co-authored 2 others. In 1997, on retiring from the aerospace industry, if such a work could ever be associated with Norm, he returned to Princeton School of Engineering and Applied Science for 2 years, this time as a member of our faculty, giving our students the privilege of working with one of the most successful and admired engineer statesmen of his generation, to use the words of former Dean James Way. Norm has also helped to guide the work of our university as a trustee and as an advisory council member for both mechanical and aerospace engineering and plasma physics. In 1995, he received the James Madison Medal, the highest award bestowed on an alumnus of the graduate school. And 2 springs ago, I had the honor of conferring on him a richly deserved honorary degree. Other honors include the National Medal of Technology from the President of the United States, the Distinguished Service Medal from the Department of Defense, and the Public Welfare Medal from the National Academy of Sciences, the latter in recognition of his seminal contribution to the vitality of science in the United States by bringing to industry and government a better understanding of the crucial role that fundamental scientific research must play in our long-term security and economic prosperity. Nowhere is this contribution more in evidence than in his work as chair of the National Academy's Committee on Prospering in the Global Economy of the 21st Century. Under his leadership, the committee produced Rising Above the Gathering Storm, Energizing and Employing America for a Brighter Economic Future, a compelling report on the state of American competitiveness in science and technology that called for dramatic improvements in math and science education and a renewed commitment to fundamental research. This highly influential report, together with Norm himself, has circulated broadly in the U.S. Congress and is credited by many, including me, with the passage of the America Competes Act last year, as well as the inclusion of substantial new resources for science and technology in the stimulus package that was passed in February. Without Norm's leadership, relentless energy, and elbow grease, I doubt either would have materialized. Today we focus on our responsibility to prepare engineers and non-engineers for successful lives in a technology-driven world. We are indeed fortunate to have Norm with us to discuss the role of engineering education in ensuring that our nation remains a global leader in science and technology. Please join me in welcoming Norm Augustine, a great Princetonian and my personal hero.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Shirley, so much. And thank you not only for that kind introduction, but for all you do for Princeton and for our country as a whole and for the world. I think there are probably many people that are not aware that shortly before the stimulus package was voted on by the Congress, President Tillman gathered the leaders of the Congress here at Princeton to talk about the importance of science and engineering and education. And I view that as the tipping point at which all the efforts that have gone into this really had an impact. And I think that was the reason we had success with the bill that we did. I also have to observe that I think for Princeton engineering, the planets have truly aligned. We had the wonderful support of President Shapiro, the dedication to science and engineering of President Tillman, and we have the leadership of Dean Poore. And it's no wonder that Princeton is on the upward trajectory that it is, and it's wonderful to see. And whenever I hear a lovely introduction like that, there was a while there, Shirley, I wasn't sure you were talking about me still. But I always think of the first day I was on the faculty here at Princeton after I'd spent my entire career up until that time in either government or in industry. And I was permitted to deliver the welcoming lecture to the incoming freshman engineering class. And as the dean was making his opening remarks on that occasion, I wasn't paying much attention. I was sitting there flipping through my lecture notes. And all of a sudden I heard Dean Way remark, and now we will hear from Professor Augustine. And this is absolutely true. For just an instant, the thought went through my mind, geez, what a coincidence. They've got some guy here by the same name as me. Surely I always feel that way when you're so generous. And as was the case on that very special occasion, I'm extremely honored, of course, to be able to speak at this milestone event for Princeton Engineering and for Princeton. And I must admit I'm somewhat surprised to be here. You see my engineering colleagues at Lockheed Martin, they always described my career as having once had promise, and then I descended into management. And I wound up as an unemployed aerospace worker, as I am today. That, though, doesn't diminish in any way, I think, the significance of this wonderful occasion that we're here to help inaugurate the Keller Center. It should have enormous impact on Princeton engineering, and in fact on the engineering profession as a whole. And we all owe a great debt of gratitude to Connie and Dennis for their support of Princeton in so many ways, and particularly for their insight, and not only focusing on the content of an engineering education, but also on how it's presented. The Keller Center should be a great asset. Also, I must confess, and if you'll forgive my lack of modesty here, that in my view, Princeton is an ideal place for just such an undertaking. And I say that because I think that Princeton produces a somewhat different kind of engineer from maybe the traditional engineer. As an example, during one of the most trying times in the industry's experience, the industry in which I had served, the aerospace industry, it was a time where restructuring was the word of the day. And as it happened, at that one time, the CEOs of almost every company in the industry were from Princeton. The CEO of Boeing, of Lockheed Martin, of McDonnell Douglas, of Grumman, of Westinghouse, and just prior to that of Hughes, all had degrees mostly from Princeton Engineering, and I guess one from Princeton Science. And some would say that was merely happenstance, but I wouldn't bet that way. And I suspect also that full disclosure requires that I reveal that the heads of several of the big investment banks were also Princetonians at that time. But they were liberal arts majors. But in any event, it's been my privilege to have worked with some extraordinary people, including a couple of my books, work closely with people. Really, I also should thank you for the plug of my book. Meg Whitman, known well to all of us, told me that one of the most sought-after collector's items on eBay are unsigned copies of my books. But I do think it's significant that the most common undergraduate degree among Fortune 500 CEOs is engineering. And I've also had any number of deans of business schools, law schools, and medical schools tell me that their favorite undergraduate degree is an engineering degree. And in one narrow sense, that diversion of talent away from our profession has its negative aspects, but it also has, I think, many positive aspects. And although I explicitly draw no analogies, I have to share with you a story about a plumber that went to a person's home to repair a leaky water faucet. And the plumber was there 10 minutes and handed the homeowner a bill for $150. The homeowner followed the plumber to the door and said, "My gosh, I can't believe this, $150 for 10 minutes work. That's more money than I make, and I'm a surgeon." And the plumber says, "Yeah, that was more money than I used to make when I was a surgeon, too." And so, yes, we do lose a lot of our graduates from our profession, but I think they do a lot of good in other fields as well. In the spirit of balance and fairness to the non-tigers in the audience, I should also probably disclose that when I wrote my first book, I received a letter from Lawrence Peter of the Peter Principle. I don't know the gentleman, but I received this letter. I have it framed at home. And he said that I had undermined his entire life's work, that I had risen not one but two levels above my level of competence. It goes without saying that today our nation faces an enormous economic problem. It's a challenge of a magnitude that exceeds anything certainly that's been seen since my class were children at the end of the Great Depression. And if you take today's economic implosion together with the structural deficiencies that we have in our economy today, it puts a particularly great burden, I think, on our nation's research universities. I think they are going to be at the very fulcrum of the future of this nation. As we work our way out of the predicament in which we seem to have found ourselves, we'd be well advised to remember the studies, and there are a large number of them, that show that in the past 50 years, 50 to 85% of the growth in the GDP in this country is attributable to advancements in science and in engineering. And similarly, about 2/3 of the growth in productivity in the last 2 decades is attributable to growth or to advancements in science and in engineering. Many other countries have noticed this phenomenon. For example, in China, of the 9 top leaders, 8 are engineers. Today, for example, the U.S. currently ranks 60th among all nations and 17th among developed nations in the percent of its college graduates who are going into engineering and science or mathematics. That's something that probably needs to be addressed very seriously, and in fact was something that the National Academies Committee that President Tillman spoke of did address. The Gathering Storm Committee consisted of 20 members, widely diverse backgrounds in terms of experience, and we unanimously concluded that the key to the future, particularly the economic challenges of the future, are to be able to be the first to discover new knowledge to be the first to take that new knowledge through engineering and translate it into useful products and services, and to be first to the market through entrepreneurship and through innovation. When you add that all together in a word, it really means innovation in our nation and in the world. One of the members of our group, Craig Barrett, who is chairman and CEO of Intel, told us that on the last day of any given year, 90% of the revenues that Intel books comes from products that didn't even exist on the first day of that same fiscal year. So how does a nation innovate? And of course, the answer is by investing in scientific research, by educating its populace, maintaining an environment that promotes innovation. You could use the word PIE, P-I-E, people, ideas, and environment, intellectual environment, creative environment. Our research universities, of course, fit in all three terms in this equation. They're the almost exclusive source of highly educated people. They also have become a major role, and maybe the dominant role, in creating new knowledge, particularly as industry is by and large abandoning the playing field of basic research. The latter is unfortunate, but driven by the pressures to meet profit projections in the next quarter. In fact, not long ago, a survey was conducted of CFOs that showed that 80% of them would cut R&D in order to meet their next quarter profit projection. One of the impacts of this, the most dramatic impact, is the virtual demise of the wonderful Bell Labs. It was the icon of industrial research throughout most of my career. So it really is going to be up to our universities to provide the people, to provide the ideas, the knowledge, and to have that creative environment that can propagate outside of the university boundaries that promotes innovation. That brings us to the question, or what are some of the challenges that the world is going to have to address in the near future, and how might engineering fit into the solution to those challenges? The list is neither short nor without opportunity. And as I summarize some of the daunting challenges, I would ask you as I go along, ask yourselves, who would you call to solve these problems? Would you call a banker? Would you call an accountant? Would you call a politician? Would you call a lawyer or an engineer? I have to be a little careful here because my daughter's an engineer. I mean a lawyer, sorry, of whom I'm very proud. She just finished a tour as one of the former president's lawyers in the White House. And furthermore, I don't want her to sue me, so I have to be very careful here. First of all, in terms of challenges, there's a matter of the economy as we see it today. The overall U.S. unemployment rate is inexorably rising toward 12%. I think that's almost inevitable. It may be worse. Question rises, who should we call to create the next generation of products that will put our economy back on its feet? Who will generate the next generation of iPods and GPSs, flat screen displays, and electric cars? Who would you call? Then there's the issue of reforming the nation's health system, a system that now consumes 17% of the GDP, while produces results that are generally considered to be overall inferior to those of many nations that spend less per capita. Who's going to solve the immense problem of coordinating medical records, the allocation of medical resources, of the logistics that go into providing health care? Who is it that will produce new generations of imaging systems? Who was it that developed the robotics and the computers that were so essential to deciphering the human genome? Next, turn to the K-12 education system. It's a system that spends substantially more per capita in this country than almost any other country, exception of Switzerland and Luxembourg. Its failings are well known, particularly in the fields of math and science. Who is it that's going to be able to produce teachers who can teach math and science and engineering and applications, make it relevant to the world and interesting to students? particularly in an environment where, for example, a bill was introduced a few weeks ago in one state legislature that's only one sentence long, and it reads as follows: the salary of a teacher may not be based on the measurable performance or productivity of the teacher or a student of that teacher. This is going to be a tough environment. Then there's the impending tipping point that the world will eventually exhaust its petroleum reserves or recoverable reserves. World energy demand is projected to increase by about 50% in the next 25 years. Energy-related CO2 emissions by almost that fraction. So who will design the nuclear plants? Who will produce clean coal? Who will figure out how to sequester carbon dioxide? Who will build effective electrical distribution systems, the electrical cars? Who will work on nuclear fusion? The problems of also the problems with fission of expended fuels. Then there's the nation's physical infrastructure, which is badly in need of repair. The cost of aviation traffic delays alone is expected to increase in the next 5 years to $30 billion annually. Deficiencies in our highway systems cost about 14,000 lives a year. The average dam in the U.S. is already 51 years old. Who will design the new aircraft, the new air traffic control systems, the new bridges, the new dams to solve these problems? Then there are the triple demands of national security against major foreign threats, against homeland security threats, and against threats to our information systems. Who is it that will secure our information systems, the transmission, storage, processing of information? Who is it that will design systems to detect covert nuclear weapons, to build ballistic missile defense systems, to help build factories that will manufacture vaccines against chemical and biological weapons, against biological weapons? That, of course, is only a partial list of the challenges our country faces today. As I say, it's an ominous list. One could also, of course, ask who's going to design the sensors, the communication systems that will better warn us of impending hurricanes and tsunamis and earthquakes. Who will provide the desalination plants that will provide water to the planet, and it's becoming increasingly arid. Now, I suppose that most of you, as I was going through my list, hopefully were thinking the answer is call an engineer. No way do I mean to demean the contribution of our colleagues in other professions, but I merely suggest that in the years ahead, it's likely that engineers are going to be called upon to a greater extent than ever before, and probably to a greater extent than other professions, to help solve these real-world problems that plague our planet. Unfortunately, of course, it's not that engineers can do no wrong. I don't mean to leave that impression. Like most professions, we're vulnerable to unintended consequences, or as the electrical engineers would probably call them, sneak circuits. I admit that it's engineers that designed your computer so that to turn it off, you have to click on start. And I admit that it was engineers who designed the remote on your TV so that to shut your TV off, you click on all on. And I also admit that it was engineers who produced the impervious transparent material in which my lunch on a transcontinental flight last week was wrapped. And by the time I got my pretzels open, they were totally crushed into little grains of powder. In fact, my much admired friend Warren Buffett has said, and I quote, "I like to think that if I'd have been a Kitty Hawk in 1903 when Orville Wright took off, I would have been far-sighted enough and public-spirited enough, I owe this to future capitalists, to shoot him down." And I must confess to you that there were times in my career when I also thought that if you wanted to make a large foreign, and if you could make a large fortune in aerospace, but if you had to start out with an even larger fortune. Engineering, incidentally, has other virtues, though, than the ones I've described. For example, I met my wife 47 years now when I was an engineering student here at Princeton. She tells me the odds were good, but the goods were odd. But if engineers are so important, where are we going to get the kind of engineers we really need? And I should include scientists in that list side by side. Shakespeare's Glendower once proclaimed, "I can call the spirits from the vasty deep." And his companion Hotspur responded by saying, "Why, so can I, or so can any man. But when you do call them, will they come?" And that's true of engineers. You can't just one day go out and say, "I need 100,000 more engineers." It takes time to build engineers. Just as you can't make a baby with 9 couples in one month, you can't produce an engineer, a PhD, and with 7 faculty members in 1 year. It takes time, and the lag time is very, very long in producing engineers and scientists as well. Clearly, the content of an engineering education has changed vastly over the years and continues to do so at a more rapid pace. When I was a student, the last chapter in our electrical engineering textbook was on something called transistors. It was a discrete transistor, no less. That was at a time when our principal calculating tool that we used here consisted of 3 sticks of wood and 2 pieces of glass. It was a device that could neither add nor subtract, and it had absolutely no idea where the decimal point might be. And if you were really good with it, you could usually get the third significant figure right about 10% of the time. Now, as primitive as that might sound, I would note defensively that we did manage to put a dozen of my friends on the moon and bring them back alive, using in part those 3 sticks of wood and 2 pieces of glass. Unlike content, though, the pedagogy of engineering education in many institutions across the country has not changed markedly over the years. And that's what our gathering today is all about. That's where the Keller Center comes in, and it's of great importance. The fact that our academic institutions have performed so well in the past, as they like to say on Wall Street, past performance is not a guarantee of future performance. Boy, they weren't kidding. I'm very mindful of the insightful comment when you try to make changes to the teaching of engineering or any other subject. It was an insightful comment by a former provost at MIT when I was a trustee there. He and I and others were trying to bring about a change in one of the programs that cut across the traditional departments. I should say, emphasize, we were trying. We weren't having much success. I had become very discouraged. The provost took me aside, seeing my discouragement, and tried to console me and said, "Norm," he said, "you just don't appreciate how difficult it is to overcome 100 years of excellence and success." That's the problem we face, particularly at Princeton and at many of the other institutions that are represented here today. Engineering education has been so excellent and so successful. The content is adapted to the time. But what can we do to adapt the teaching? How should it be changed to adapt to the times? And that's what I would like to focus on a little bit. Because if all we do is take the results of the past as our standard for the future, we never improve. In that vein, one of my favorite stories I like to tell is about from that great philosopher Charlie Brown, who was practicing archery, and he was doing it by shooting arrows at a fence. And of course, he was being watched by his peripatetic friend Lucy. And Charlie fires an arrow at the fence, runs to the fence, and takes out a piece of chalk and draws a target around where the arrow on the fence. And he shouts out, "Bullseye again!" And needless to say, Lucy goes ballistic and explains to him that if you just set the target where you've already been, you're not likely to ever get any better. And that's probably true of our profession and teaching of it as well. So what might an appropriate 21st century university education, principally at the bachelor's level, look like? And some might say that it would be the epitome of audacity to address that question in front of this particular audience. They're almost certainly correct, but uninhibited by sound judgment, I'm going to go do exactly that. My only credentials are that I had 80,000 colleagues at Lockheed Martin who were engineers. We hired 1/20th of the engineers in the country that graduated. And I also accumulated an awful lot of scar tissues over the years. when I contributed personally some of the greatest explosions you've ever seen of rockets, and I really was a rocket scientist. So fasten your seatbelts. I'm going to offer, not like Moses, only 10 commandments. I've got 16 suggestions, and I'm going to go through them quickly. First, the sine qua non of engineering education is a good understanding of the fundamentals of nature, physics, chemistry, and certainly of the language of engineering, mathematics. It's those fundamental pieces of knowledge that make everything that engineers do possible. And there is a problem, though. Even these fundamentals, as the dean at many medical schools often tells the graduating class that unfortunately half of what we have taught you is incorrect. The problem is we don't know which half. And one can see that. When I was an undergraduate, we were taught that there were, as I recall, there were three basic elements of matter. There are protons, neutrons, and electrons. Nobody mentioned bosons or leptons or quarks to us. So we didn't even know the Higgs particle was missing or that we were supposed to be looking for it. But to not know what is known is a great handicap on a career. Second, it's critical to continue to teach the concepts that underpin the basics of design and analysis, particularly parametric trade-offs, and that is the fundamentals of engineering itself. And that should include the basics of testing, of manufacturing, of maintainability, reliability. That is, again, we should continue to teach engineering, and happily most engineering schools today do a pretty good job in that regard. Third, it's time to seriously address the circumstance where we lose to the engineering profession over a third of those undergraduates who set out to be engineers, usually before the end of their freshman year. This has sort of in the past been viewed as an initiation to the profession, if you will, sort of a rite of passage. But that flawed notion is being readdressed at some institutions, certainly with Princeton in the lead. And this widespread belief that engineers shouldn't be exposed to anything having to do with engineering until their sophomore year seems to have had a very negative effect on the profession over the years. And today, of course, curricula are being introduced where you get hands-on experience in engineering as a freshman. The fourth thing I would mention would be that every would-be engineer should be subjected to one course that examines the root causes of engineering failures of the past. That is the lessons learned course. Matter of fact, I even have a name for it. I'd call it Scar Tissue 101. When participating in engineering failures and failure reviews in both industry and the government, and I unfortunately seem to do a lot of that in my career, I never cease to be amazed at how often we learn the same lesson over and over again. At great price to our careers and to our employers. And we repeatedly learn, for example, that in complex systems, failures usually come from a coupling of two failure modes that were thought to be independent and turned out they really weren't independent. Space Shuttle Challenger is a prime example. I've concluded that nature is not belligerent, but nature is extremely unforgiving. And in this regard, our overall record of risk analysis is probably one of the most neglected areas in the field of engineering. And the practice of acquiring that knowledge through on-the-job training is sort of a form of self-flagellation and costs a lot more money than the tuition to any university in this country. One can also learn from experiences of the past. I mentioned the Challenger, the World Trade Center, the walkways at the Kansas City Hyatt, the I-35 bridge, the 35W bridge not long ago, the tiles in the Big Dig. Even further back, the Hindenburg crash, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And I used to, in my class, I would talk to my students about the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And one bright student raised his hand and said, "Professor," he said, "how many tourists do you think would go to see the vertical tower of Pisa?" Princeton students are very bright. Fifth is the need to expose students to the rudiments of systems engineering at the undergraduate level and to provide an option to study that as a graduate course. The problem one often encounters when you speak of systems engineering is people start out, well, what do you mean by a system? Because certainly a hydrogen atom is a system, so too is the universe a system. And one of our big problems is defining what are we talking about when we have a system. When I speak of systems engineering, I think of the engineering of useful items that have 2 or more components. And systems engineers typically work at the interface of those components, which typically has been where we have most of our problems, incidentally. Ironically, very few universities even purport to teach systems engineering, and yet it's one of the most sought-after fields or skills in industry. And one of the reasons I think that it's hard to teach in universities is that it runs orthogonally to the stovepipes that we have in our traditional departmental systems that have worked very well in the past. 6, the 21st century engineering education needs to have much more operations and systems analysis content with a lot more focus on the fields of probability and statistics. So many products that engineers build are very dependent upon the laws of probability. And the same could be said of the trade-offs that get into requirements definitions. 7th, there's the rapidly evolving demand that engineers possess a knowledge of the basics of the modern biosciences. No other field, maybe with the arguable exceptions of nanotechnology and the information sciences, including optics, are likely to have as broad and as profound impact on our lifestyles in the years ahead as are the biosciences. This is new, in my experience, kind of in the last few decades, where in the past, to me, biology meant how many more frogs are we going to cut up? And engineering meant something totally different over here, building bridges. The amazing thing is today, those have come together really as closely related fields in so many areas that we've seen. Tying together, incidentally, if you take the case of producing energy or producing plastics, tie together the fields of agriculture, chemical engineering, chemistry, the pure bioscience. 8th on my list is that engineers have long suffered from an insufficient understanding of the fundamentals of economics. I mean the fundamentals. I don't mean anything particularly profound. I mean calculating future values, net present values, internal rates of returns, the appropriateness of expensing or capitalizing investments. And particularly to teach the double-edged effects of leverage, which the folks on Wall Street never seem to really learn. Ask Bear Stearns or Lehman Brothers or AIG. 9th, every engineer, I believe, should pursue a course or otherwise be exposed to the subject of ethics. And I'm not referring here to the teachings of Socrates or Kant or Augustine. I'm talking to the day-to-day, real-world ethical issues that engineers run into. And I used to be kind of surprised when I talked to young engineers that the inclination was to say that we don't have anything to do with ethics. We deal with the absolute laws of nature. Wrong. Throughout careers, people will run into ethical issues. The first rocket I worked on some years ago when I got out of college was the first one I had any real responsibility for, in fact. Due to an oversight of the little group I was responsible for, and basically my oversight, the rocket blew up. Fortunately, it was unmanned. My career recovered. But I've known a lot of people who made one ethical error in their career, and their career never recovered, their lives never recovered. And so what could be more important than to try to explain that to our students who will face that kind of decision from time to time in their career? The field of ethics is a lot like rocketry. You don't get recalls or do-overs. 10th, the canonical engineering education tends to be rather void of content in political science, civics, history, government, public policy, and so on. Here's a place that Princeton tends to shine. Increasingly, though, engineers are called upon to build the things society wants them to build, not the things they can build. Witness the human Mars program or the superconducting supercollider, supersonic transport. All these were engineering tours de force, but all were dead on arrival. Engineers do tend to believe that good work will speak for itself. My experience is that that's not the case, unfortunately. I've testified before the Congress nearly 100 times, And I can assure you that not everyone shares the view that because we could do it, we should. If engineers are unwilling or unable to speak out with balanced, factual, honest advice, who is it that's going to help our government make sound decisions when they're dealing with these technically rich issues that they confront? 11th, I would not offer a list of this type without citing the enormous benefits to an engineering education that I think derive from at least some exposure to the fields of the liberal arts, literature, art, music. I think my own career benefited very significantly from the exposure that I had from studying engineering in what was basically a liberal arts institution. And I think it's fine to take pride to be a pocket-protected, slide rule buried geek, which I do. But I think it's also important to recognize that not everyone reads popular mechanics for fun. A few years ago, I was privileged to deliver a lecture at MIT, another great institution. And I noted to the audience that the mechanical engineering department had in its catalog what I thought was an absolutely superb set of requirements for a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. I pointed out that it included, in addition to the usual science, math, and engineering curriculum, the mandatory coursework included 6 semesters of either French or German, 2 semesters of English literature, 1 semester each of rhetoric, English composition, U.S. history, European history, industrial history, political economics, business law, and the economics of corporations. And I profusely complimented the audience from MIT on this foresight. I then pointed out to them that I'd been reading the MIT catalog from 1900. Maybe we need to move backwards if we want to move forwards here. 12th, I would observe that most engineers I've known were actually quite good engineers. Many of them were superb engineers. But frankly, most of them had an uncanny ability to take an elegant piece of engineering work and make it totally incomprehensible when they wrote it down what they'd done. You see, engineers have never yet really fully accepted the notion that every sentence deserves a verb. And I would read proposals that we had spent millions of dollars on engineering work to prepare, and when you read the proposal, you couldn't tell what we were proposing. And I suppose I should also talk about verbal presentations, but I'm not even going to go there. Engineers really are going to have to develop a better ability to convey their ideas if we're to make the contribution that we can as a profession. And once again, OJT is not a good way to learn communication skills any better than it's a way to learn neurosurgery. And just last week I saw a headline in the newspaper that it must have been written by an engineer. The headline actually said this. It said FEMA, which is what, Federal Emergency Management Agency. It said FEMA to move people into toxic trailers. I think there was something slipped up there. One of my favorite errors along that line pertains to the aerospace industry. It's from USA Today, and it has the following quotation. CEO Kent Kressa also said Northrop will continue to sell non-productive assets. Last year, he said it sold its headquarters in Los Angeles. Kent's an engineer. 13th, recognize that we are living in an era of big engineering. Those who want to participate in engineering projects are going to have to learn to work as part of a team. The lone genius still is needed. There's a place for the Thomas Edisons and the Alexander Graham Bells, but most projects today are going to involve work with people with very disparate backgrounds. And so we need to devote some time to projects that involve leadership and followership, cooperation, compromise, short team efforts. 14th, the most recent emerging attribute of engineering projects is that they frequently involve participants from around the world. Your nearest partner may be 8,000 miles away. And the 21st century engineer probably should spend some time during their educational years studying abroad, not only for what they learn from the content, but from the experience of seeing other ways of living. And I don't suggest that the law of thermodynamics is very different in Paris or Peru or Panama or Princeton, but I do think that the cultural experience is going to be priceless. In that regard, it's noteworthy that this year there are over 200,000 engineers mostly engineers, 200,000 students, mostly engineers, from the People's Republic of China who are studying abroad. 15th emphasis needs to be encouraged, particularly in laboratory work on creativity and exploration, innovation, entrepreneurship. This, of course, is a traditional strength of the American educational experiences compared with that in many other countries, but it remains very important. And as former President Shapiro said, I didn't know, Harold, you were going to be here, so I hope I've got this right. Harold put it, and I quote this a lot because I like it so well, he said, "I do not recommend failure, nor am I attracted to the idea that failure builds character, but the willingness to accept the risk of failure is one of the costs of leadership, and therefore the price of all success," which I think says it awfully well. And then 16th and last, and I realize here I'm getting perilously close to the third rail, and what I'm going to say, fortunately, probably applies less to Princeton than most places, but probably still applies somewhat. And that is, as I've traveled around a lot of universities, I've concluded that the time has come to do a little rebalancing in the emphasis on research and teaching. And you probably would have trouble finding anybody who's a greater believer in research than myself. But I'm not arguing for a revolution, but for a vernier correction, to give teaching a bit more emphasis in our research institutions. Well, that completes my list of what I think it takes to prepare an engineer to contribute in this very demanding 21st century. It's a daunting list. It's only a beginning. Certainly, unless students continue to study after they get out of school, when you look at the rapid pace of change of engineering, they will be professionally middle-aged 10 years after they get their diploma. Probably should put an expiration date on our diplomas. If you don't, you may believe now that I don't realize what you were thinking when I got to about item number 5 on my list. And you were probably thinking that's all great stuff, but how are you going to do that in 4 years? And the answer is you're not. It can't be done. Which leads me to conclude that the entry degree to the engineering profession is going to have to become the master's degree and won't be able to be the bachelor's degree for much longer. Kind of ironic, it takes more education to give a prescription for vaccination for my neighbor's cat than it takes to design an airplane that 1 million people will fly on. With all that said, I think you can all see why the Keller Center could have such an enormous impact in debating these and other ideas that could impact the teaching of engineering as well as its content. And the important impact it could also have at exposing liberal arts students to engineering, which they need, I think, very dearly as well. It's always struck me as a certain irony that an engineering student at Princeton and other places is considered not well-rounded if they don't know something about the liberal arts. But somehow liberal arts students escaped and could be officially well-rounded if they didn't know anything about engineering. And I've concluded that Washington Road is a diode. You can go from west to east, but not east to west. The Keller Center, I think, is likely to change that. So in the 4.5 billion years this planet's been around and the some 200,000 years that human forms have occupied it, there's never probably been a more exciting time to be an engineer than this sliver of time that we live in today. And it's engineers that have fundamentally changed the world and made it a global community by inventing the airplane that lets you move things and people nearly at the speed of sound very cheaply. It's engineers who invented communication systems, the computers, all the storage systems that lets you move knowledge at the speed of light throughout the world. It's tied all these people together. But to paraphrase Thomas Friedman, Paris, Pakistan, and Princeton are now next-door neighbors. Well, 57 years ago, my first day at Princeton began when I was a student. As I climbed out of my 3-legged bed, it was a bargain. I was able to get it with it had only 3 legs. But it turned out a few used thermodynamics books from the used store worked just great for the leg. As I climbed out of my 3-legged bed to the clanging of my wind-up mechanical analog alarm clock, I picked up my slide rule. I chased the mouse from under my pad, grabbed some, that was a Witherspoon, I grabbed some potato chips and a load of textbooks, put on my khakis, checked to see about the virus my roommate had, trudged off to my 7:40 a.m. Saturday morning class of mechanical drawing, where we were learning to draw with ink on starched linen. Great source, your errors make good handkerchiefs. Now contrast that with today's student who awakens to the sound of her satellite radio, puts a mouse in her backpack, picks up a handful of chips, grabs her laptop, a Kindle, puts on an iPod, texts her friend in London, checks on her computer's virus, trudges off to a class in computer-aided design. So if you want to change the world, don't call an engineer, be an engineer. Thank you.
Norm has consented to take questions now, so please, let's open it up to the audience.
From Augustine's 16 commandments, which one or two you will take as the most important for next 10 years for engineers?
Boy, did you hear that all right? The question was, of the 16 commandments, which one or two are the most important for engineers for the next 10 years? I thought you were going to ask me about my backhand and why it was so bad. My little tennis buddy. That is really tough. I haven't tried to put those in priority order because I think they're all important. I would put a lot of emphasis on the communication one, written and oral communication on the part of engineers. I would put a lot of emphasis on the exposure to bioengineering as a field. That hasn't been traditional for most engineers. I guess that's two. Those two certainly come to mind. Thank you.
Yeah, up there.
Yes. You spoke a lot about what you believe to be the essential components of a new form of engineering undergraduate degree. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how we train educators to be the professors who are going to embrace and deliver this sort of education to undergraduate students. I'm wondering in particular what responsibilities universities such as this might have to train graduate students to embrace these sorts of things, and how that can be done at Princeton, which is a school that traditionally prides itself on having mainly faculty in teaching roles and not so much allowing graduate students those opportunities.
That's a great question. I wish I had a good answer because I think one of the things that is terrific here is that most courses, when I was here, I think all courses were taught by members of the faculty. I don't remember having a graduate student ever teach a course. Is that still true? But that's rare, as you all know, as you go around the country. It has a disadvantage, of course, that you cite, and that is how the graduate students become good teachers. We have teaching assistants, but they don't really get the full benefit of the training of teaching in a classroom, I think. Matter of fact, a brief story, just a couple of days before classes began, when I was going to teach here, it was the vice chairman of our department came by to see me, and he said, Norm, you'll need a teaching assistant. And I said, what's a teaching assistant? We didn't have such things. I said, what would I do with a teaching assistant? He looked at me and he said, you better have two. And you were right. You were right. It absolutely saved me. And one thing I did try to do was have the teaching assistant have hours to meet with the students in groups, to oversee some of the class projects, to provide counseling, to run the labs, and occasionally to give a part of a talk in part of a class. But I think the best way I know to learn those things that you mentioned is by doing them and being exposed to them. And so I think as we change the undergraduate curriculum, we'll begin to produce teachers who can do these things. But you run into this chicken and egg problem that I frankly don't have a good answer to.
Other questions? Yeah.
Similar to the first question, just with the list of challenges that you mentioned, if you were forced to prioritize those, what are the top couple or few?
Now, the question is, if I were to try to prioritize, if I were forced to prioritize the list of challenges I mentioned, sort of how would I do that? That is really hard. One reason it's really hard is that they're coupled. They interrelate so much. You take the environment, education, energy, research, they're all different sides of the same coin to some extent. So as it happens, I've been working with a group at the Center for the Study of the Presidency that has been trying to do just what you said. And we put together a list of what we thought were the 10 major challenges that our nation faces. And it included the sorts of things I was talking about. And we finally gave up at trying to put them in order. And we just kind of randomly listed them in terms of the 10. Because if you ignore some of them, you know, how do you ignore the healthcare problem? How do you ignore the terrorism problem? How do you ignore the K through 12 education crisis we've got here? How do you ignore the economy? How do you ignore the environment? So I guess I'm one who thinks President Obama is probably right, that you can't do these in serial order. I think you got to take them all on. May the good Lord help the man and his colleagues, because it's going to be a tough road to hoe.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, one of the great features of Princeton has been its senior thesis and the junior experience that students have with research. And you sort of talked about focusing on courses. I was struck by Carl Wyman's talk that I heard a little while ago, expressing the importance of laboratory, I mean really research experience, and what that made a difference for him in his career. And I think that's a great opportunity here at Princeton. Can you make any comments about how that might be fit into this 16 categories you've mentioned?
Yes, indeed. When I talked about the sort of what is the basic engineering curriculum, frankly, I should have been more explicit about that, because I think I talked about experience with manufacturing and reliability and maintainability and testing and things like that, but I couldn't agree more. I think that particularly the senior thesis experience is priceless, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, but it's the closest thing to the real world that probably a student will face before they get their degree. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to go back and specifically add that to my list of items.
Would you push that to the 5th year, or would you still have it in the 4th year?
If I had 5, this is a real problem for a place like Princeton, where a class is a class, and to break up the 4 years to study abroad is a big problem, or to have a 5th year is a big problem. So I probably wouldn't get rid of the bachelor's degree. I'd have the master's degree, and I haven't thought about it enough to know whether I'd put that in the 4th or the 5th year. Probably the 5th, but I'd want to think about that awfully carefully before I answered that.
I would take one more question, and there was a hand up right here.
Well, this is tongue-in-cheek. I've tried this before, Norm. What would it take to get you to come to Caltech to give a talk?
Anytime you tell me to go somewhere, I go there. You know that. I follow your instructions.
All right, we'll take one more.
It has to be a different question, right?
In your list, you talked about the need for economics understanding among engineers, which I absolutely support. But I think part of that is also the need to have greater sense of urgency, time to market, the value of time, economic value of time in a commoditized world, where if you are second to market, you know, because you've over-designed, or better is the, you know, best is the enemy of good enough. And that really is a critical element, in my opinion, in engineering at the appropriate time, but also being first to market in a globalized economy that is basically totally commoditized.
Well, I absolutely agree with you. One of the main criticisms I hear of my field, aerospace, is that we would rather put a laser on the moon than do something useful here on Earth, and always try to go to the very edge of the state of the art, because that's where the challenge is. The lesson I've really learned in the regard you raised, I spent a number of years on Procter & Gamble's board, and they are so good at finding that sweet spot where if it costs more than this amount, people won't afford it. And if it costs less, it doesn't have the qualities that you want to have, they won't put their name on it. And so there's got to be some spot that engineers learn to design to. And frankly, most of us kind of learned we like challenges. And maybe one of those challenges should be to learn to design things that hit that sweet spot in terms of economic considerations. Good question.
Let's thank Norm
My
again.
pleasure, Vince. Thank you.
Okay, so stay tuned. In about 5 minutes, we're going to start with the formal dedication ceremony of the Keller Center. A few more people are coming in, so please come have a seat, and we'll start in about 5 minutes. So please keep your seats.
So I thought that was a good
I'm Vince Poore. I'm the Dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Science here at Princeton, and this is really a wonderful day, as I've said before, celebrating the Keller Center and all of its great work, and a chance to thank Dennis and Connie for their extreme generosity in making it all happen. So, I've really been looking forward to this opportunity for quite some time, an opportunity to formally thank Dennis and Connie for what they've done for us, and I'm really happy to have a few minutes to speak with you today during this formal dedication ceremony. So, before I say more, let me just say a little bit about the genesis of the Keller Center. The idea of having a center in engineering education here at Princeton came about from a very intense and inclusive strategic planning process that we underwent in 2003. And this was under the auspices of my predecessor, Maria Clave. I wasn't here at the time. I was on sabbatical, so I can't take any credit at all for the idea. But when I came back and heard about it, I thought it was just a wonderful idea, a great opportunity to do something that is very much in the heart of what Princeton is all about, and with a great engineering school in the context of a tremendous liberal arts university. So when Maria asked me to be the first director of the center, I leapt at the chance. Again, I thought it was a great opportunity to do a lot of wonderful things. And the outpouring of interest from faculty and so forth at the beginning of the center, and of course throughout its existence, has been just really tremendous, and shows what a great idea it was to found this center. The center's main goal is to prepare students, all students, engineering students and others, to be leaders in a technological world. And not only is this important for Princeton, but this is important for the whole educational enterprise, not only in the United States, but in the world. And I see the Keller Center as a model for other institutions. So I think what we're doing, of course, affects our own students at Princeton, but also I think it's going to affect other students at other universities throughout the world. Now, I've gotten to know Dennis pretty well during the past few years. I've learned a lot from him. He and I have talked a lot about engineering and Princeton more generally, and particularly about the Keller Center, or what has become the Keller Center. And I could really go on and talk about many fine qualities and great things I've learned about Dennis, but I want to mention three of what I would say are the most important qualities that I've observed in him. Vision, global perspective, and perhaps most important, joy. In terms of vision, Dennis has been chair of the Engineering School's Leadership Council for many years. And one of the things that I've noticed about him is he consistently has expressed a vision of excellence. I know in working with him, I could see why his life's work at DeVry has been so productive and so successful. He inspires us, he gently inspires us, I should say, because he's a very gentle man. To examine business as usual. He's always asking questions about why we do what we're doing, how can we improve them. And those questions often lead to great new ideas, great new programs, and so forth. And on top of that, he's our strongest advocate, both to our alumni, and the trustees, to the administration. He's been his great vision, and he's a great friend of ours. Also, Dennis has global perspective. You know, he's always sees the big picture. He's a Princeton trustee, as I mentioned, and he really very clearly sees the relationship between engineering and the rest of the university and how it all fits together and how important they are to one another. You know, he has long-time interest in Africa and a deep concern for the global environment. These are shared, of course, with Connie and other family members I know. And he knows that Princeton's impact extends far beyond this campus and even beyond the United States. And this is something, of course, engineering is very heavily involved in today. And finally, joy. And I think this is probably the most important thing about Dennis. Whenever you talk to Dennis, you see him in action, there's always, he's surrounded by a sense of joy. Whether he's just returned from a trip with his family, and believe me, he takes some really nice trips, or if he's about to head off to Africa with his friends and family, or even if he's preparing for an annual giving meeting, he always exudes enthusiasm. You just can't help but be excited when you're around Dennis about whatever's going on. So Dennis, thank you for the many gifts you've offered to Princeton, including your vision, your global perspective, and joy. And I'm really extremely grateful to you and Connie both for your commitment to engineering education. And I'm deeply honored with the trust that you've placed in us as the stewards of that vision. So thank you very much. I could go on, but they've only given me 5 minutes. So now it's my pleasure to introduce the director of the Keller Center, my colleague Sherrod Malik. In addition to his role as the Keller Center director, Sherrod is the George Van Ness Lothrop Professor in the Electrical Engineering Department. He received his PhD in computer science from Berkeley and his undergraduate degree in electrical engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi. As director, in addition to his role as a scholar researcher, a scholar teacher here at Princeton, as director of the Keller Center over the past 3 years, he's done a number of very innovative things. He's expanded the number and visibility of engineering courses available to all students on campus. About 60% now of our students from the liberal arts take classes in engineering. He's helped many students participate in projects outside the classroom, both in the community around Princeton, elsewhere in the U.S., and in the world, particularly in the developing world. And he's hosted many exciting guests and visitors that have greatly enhanced what's happening, happening here at Princeton. So I can't imagine a better person to be leading the Keller Center, and I'm very happy to introduce him to you now. Sherrod.
Thanks, Vince, for that kind introduction. So Princeton attracts absolutely fabulous students, and as faculty members, we feel really privileged to teach them. And at the same time, that places an obligation on us to prepare them for the world, to prepare them to be leaders. Now, at the Keller Center, we are connecting engineering students to the world around them through experiential learning that happens both inside and outside the classroom. And we're connecting students in other disciplines to engineering through courses that touch the essential issues that face society now and into the future, and these span from energy and climate change to high-tech entrepreneurship. I hope all of you had a chance to pick up our annual report as you were walking in. This goes into far more detail on both sides of our mission here. In many ways, the valedictorian and the salutatorian of the Princeton's class of 2008, they embody what the Keller Center hopes to achieve on a much larger scale. The valedictorian, Zachary Squire, was a classics major, yet he spent his last summer working in the Center for Mid-Infrared Technologies for Health and the Environment right here on campus. So while at the center, he investigated possible applications of quantum cascade lasers and studied the interaction of scientists and policymakers. The class of 2008 salutatorian was James Morrison, a chemical engineering major, whom Vice-Dean Pablo de Benedetti describes as one of the best undergraduates he's taught in his 23 years at Princeton. Morrison excelled at his major, and like any Princeton student, he took classes in many departments, and very interestingly, amongst his non-engineering courses was a class on the Latin lyric poems of Horace. While learning the fundamentals of their field, regardless of what that field is, Princeton students learn to be original and expansive thinkers, to take risks, and to give back to society. I'm very excited to be leading the efforts of the Keller Center at this time and to be amongst a group of very good faculty here who are teaching all of Princeton students about technology in these, as Norm pointed out, very dynamic and exciting times. The experiences we are providing to our students through the Keller Center's programs and courses are interdisciplinary, entrepreneurial, and inspirational. The video that you're just about to see will give you a taste of the impact that the Keller Center is having on our students. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks very much, Dennis and Connie, and thanks to all of you for joining us today.
As engineers, it's really important that we actually do keep a larger picture of where is this actually going.
That's how the world should work. And it really doesn't.
The philosophy on life is that service is the right to pay for living. I think that that's something that it would be great, and it would make the world so much better if everyone could have subscribed to that sort of philosophy.
Someone gets this part, you guys get talking, and you realize, oh, we actually can solve this together.
How does all the groundbreaking research that I'm doing apply to the real world? And how can I make it into a product that people are going to use and it's going to make the world a better place to live?
I know that cycling is a huge part of my life, and so whenever I learn through that lens. You know, building bikes out of bamboo can solve so many different problems on so many different levels. It's a way of transportation. It is sustainable.
I view robotics as incredibly interdisciplinary because you can't do robotics without mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and computer science coming together.
Teach children in grades from 3rd grade up through middle school about engineering. What we're able to do is help them realize that there's so many more career options, especially with female students, especially students whose parents aren't engineers themselves.
Entrepreneurialism solves other people's problems with a mind towards how to make life better.
System of checks and balances where it actually forces you to really be cognizant of everything that's already out there and make sure that you are actually pushing the envelope.
If everyone's riding a bike, the world would be better.
Robotic vehicles save people's lives. They save soldiers' lives on the battlefield and civilian lives of people who die in car crashes every day.
I just want to think that in curing cancer, that we also cure cancer for everyone, not just the people who can afford it.
Engineering is not just science. I mean, if you do math or physics, that is math or physics, but engineering is not that. It uses those as tools, but then you have to know how it can be applied in the real world.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to those of you who've just joined us. I'm delighted to see so many of you here, friends, colleagues, alumni, and students all here to celebrate the dedication of the Keller Center for Innovation in Engineering Education. It's a great day for Princeton and for everyone who believes that engineering is relevant to undergraduates in every field. Today we celebrate the Keller Center, named in honor of Dennis Keller, a member of the class of 1963, the great class of 1963, and his wife, Connie. We are fortunate to have several generations of the Keller family with us today, And on behalf of the university, I want to extend warmest welcomes to Dennis, to Connie, and to their children, Jeff and Temp of the great class of 1998, and to their families. Dennis and Connie's son, David, would have joined us today, but he and his wife, Avery, of the class of 1999, have something else to celebrate, the arrival of a new baby boy. We have been looking forward to this day for quite some time. As many of you know, Dennis and Connie got Princeton's Aspire campaign off to a roaring start with this gift, the very first gift in the very first minute of the campaign's quiet phase. This will surprise no one who knows Dennis and Connie. It is most appropriate that we are gathered here in the Friends Center for Engineering Education. Almost 10 years ago, Dennis dedicated this very building in honor of his friend and classmate, Peter Friend. At the time, he said that he hoped the Friends Center would not only provide new resources for engineering students, but also draw undergraduates from other disciplines to the study of engineering and its impact on their lives. Now, once again, the Kellers are helping us to build a university where technology informs the liberal arts, and the liberal arts inform technology. In other words, where our students can develop the broad array of skills and insights that they will need to become responsible citizens and effective leaders. We live in a society where it is increasingly difficult to imagine personal or professional lives that do not have a significant technological component. The Keller Center broadens the understanding of our students, engineers and non-engineers alike, to the economic, social, and environmental forces that shape and are shaped by technology. We heard about many of them a few minutes ago from Norm Augustine. And it offers an abundance of hands-on experience through internships, entrepreneurship, and community service, so students can engage with real-life engineering problems and solutions. We fully expect the Keller Center to have an impact that carries well beyond the borders of this campus, not only through the lives of its alumni, but as a pedagogical model that will inspire similar initiatives elsewhere. This is indeed a cause for celebration, as is the generosity, loyalty, and imagination that made the Keller Center possible. Dennis is himself an educational innovator, having founded DeVry, which provides educational opportunities to tens of thousands of students through undergraduate and graduate programs, ranging from technology to management. He also serves his alma mater as a charter trustee, as vice chair of the executive committee of the Board of Trustees, and as a member of the executive committee of the Aspire campaign. And of course, he is a devoted supporter of engineering, as you just heard from Vince, sharing his time and energy as co-chair of the school's leadership council. The Keller's many gifts to Princeton have always honored others, from the Friends Center to Whitman College's class of '63 courtyard and the library and the class of 1998's dining room. So I am delighted that Dennis and Connie have finally agreed to attach their name to this groundbreaking educational initiative. My warmest thanks to you both for all that you have done to advance our mission as a university and for helping us to redefine the meaning of engineering education on our campus. I'd now like to invite Dennis to say a few words.
Thank you, Shirley. And I do have a couple of things I'd like to say. But first, there's a person here who is enormously important to Connie and to me. We have 3 sons, we have 4 grandsons, and we have 1 granddaughter. And she is here, and she said, when you get up, could I stand up? And I would love it if she and her brothers would stand up, turn around, wave, and say hi to all the nice people. I do have a couple of other things. One is about engineering. And a question that may be in some of your minds, if you've read or known that this is an old, broken down econ major that has become so involved with Princeton engineering. How has that happened? Well, it started when Harold Shapiro and Jim Way asked me to help reconstitute the C's Advisory Council or Leadership Council in the early 1990s. And I'm afraid I must have joked so often about being the token non-engineer in that group that they made me chair. And thank heavens I now have a real engineer, Don Dixon, as my co-chair, and I'm his co-chair, and so we got engineering covered now in the chairman's department. And over the years, through this growing involvement that I've had since the early 1990s, more and more with engineering, I have come to see and really appreciate the central role that engineering and technology have played and must play for the future of our species on this planet. It's just that simple. To make possible sustainable use of the Earth's resources and in a myriad other ways and other developments to improve the quality of life around the world. We need the best work in applied science and engineering that the human mind is capable of providing. So I've come to understand that this school is one of the best engineering schools anywhere. And I've asked myself, in the areas of our focus, why not become the best? And the answer is, I think we can do that, and I intend to continue to do my best to help. Extending from that, I believe that in terms of our informal motto, Princeton in the nation's service and in the service of all nations, the return on thoughtful, incremental investments in C's will be spectacular. That certainly appeals to whatever economist there still is in me in terms of return on investment. And I know through their actions and just working with them and living with them that Shirley Tillman and Vince Poore are right there, both of them. You'd expect Vince to be there, but Shirley is right there, shoulder to shoulder, and all of that's happened that you see around you could not have happened without both Harold's preparation and Shirley's drive from that point. So, as you can tell, I am a happy investor, a very happy investor in C's. Now, the second thing I wanted to say is about Princeton. So I'd like to close with a few words about this university. I love this place. It's 4 words, and I've loved it ever since I came here in 1959. It's been, I've seen the way that I love the people here, and I love the place and the programs, and I've seen it so many times. I've seen it empower the students here and everybody who works in this enterprise. It empowers all of us, not just here, not just all over the country, but truly around the world, and we are around the world. So, one little example of the kind of thing that has stayed with me and been with me all my life since 1959 is a place that I took my youngest son, Temp, class of '98, to see when he came here as a visitor with me when he was still in high school. And we walked to the archway that is outside the doorway to Makash 50, where in the stones above the door, the words are there that say, "Here we were taught by men in Gothic towers, democracy and faith and righteousness and love of unseen things that do not die." And there are little things like that all around this university that keep me very much in touch with the values under which I was raised and the values that I saw and participated in and learned here. And so what can I say? I guess another way to say it is that I am absolutely, it's clear to me, absolutely clear to me that I have received much more than I've given as a Princetonian. And I thank all of you and all of our colleagues and the opportunities that have been coming to me ever since the late 1950s, and which I hope will continue for a long time so I can help more. So thank you. That's it.
You know, Dennis, as I know it is indeed the case that you love this place, I can tell you, this place loves you. No question. We want to present Dennis and Connie as a smallest of token of our thanks for what you have made possible with the Keller Center. This portfolio that contains pictures and the video of some of the projects that have happened at Princeton because of the creation of the Keller Center. So I'll show everybody else this portfolio, and we hope that you will enjoy it, and it will remind you of the extraordinary thing you have done here at Princeton University. Thank you both.